All right, welcome back, everybody. My name is Jack Paisley, and this is the Sports Casual. Welcome back for another episode. Big week of NFL, and then huge UFC pay per view this week that we get to talk about. A lot of big fun stuff, a lot of crazy storylines. Let's get right into it. Let's start with the UFC. So we had UFC 310 this week. Uh, Alejandro Pantoja versus Kai Asakura out in LA. Honestly, great card overall. Obviously headlined by the 125 pounders, but a couple of big name fights on there. So I guess we'll start with the main event. So Pantoja versus Asakura. Obviously, Pantoja is defending his flyweight belt, so 125 pounds, against the UFC first timer Kai Asakura, who's a Japanese, primarily striker. He was, I believe, a Ryzen champion before getting signed to the UFC. And then the big controversy is that his first fight in the UFC was for the title. And this kind of shows not only how, the UFC are kind of searching for some stars outside of Pantoja and then Brandon Moreno at 125 pounds, and they're just kind of struggling to do it. Obviously, Pantoja and Brandon have fought quite a few times, and Pantoja has won every single time, including their last fight. So you can't really go in that direction again. At some point, it's going to be kind of like the Davison Figueiredo versus Pantoja or Brandon Moreno fights, where it's just a little, it gets repetitive. It's tough selling the same story over and over again and trying to talk us into different, realities of that fight happening. So they had to bring in some outside guys like Kai. I thought he actually looked pretty good. He had some big strikes in that first quarter period, and then it's just Pantoja's a monster. The second he's walking you down, just like he's in Call of Duty Zombies the whole time, never takes a step back, and he's such a beast on the ground that coming into this fight, I actually really liked Pantoja by submission was the bet that I made. Obviously got done in the second by, I believe, rear naked choke, and yeah, right after the fight, he calls out Demetrius Johnson or Mighty Mouse, who retired from, I believe, one championship as their champion, and basically put it on the line like this. We should have a goat fight, and it wasn't really received by Demetrius Johnson. I mean, he came out right after he was streaming the whole fight that he's like, nah, I'm making too much money out here on YouTube to get back into that ring. So I don't really think that fight's gonna happen. It'd be great if it did. I mean, I'm kind of in favor of it not coming out as well, just because Mighty Mouse is older, and if he comes out against a Pantoja and just looks old, it's gonna hurt his legacy out there. And I don't really love watching all these older fighters just going out and getting their butts kicked. It's happened a lot. I mean, it happened on this card with Anthony Smith and then Clay Guida, and then Chris Weidman as well. All didn't look great, and they all got their butts handed to them. So I kind of hope that fight never happens. I think Kai Kara France is kind of the logical next step for Pantoja. He's the only guy in the top 10 that he hasn't beat, which is just a crazy stat to make. But Pantoja is definitely starting to get in that flyweight goat discussion with Mighty Mouse. That's really the only other guy he's competing with. I mean, Moreno was in there for a little bit, but Pantoja has owned that man. So we'll see what happens. But I mean, super entertaining fight. Kai definitely had him hurt a couple of times, but it was just the grappling was too much for Kai to overcome. And then the co-main, which was arguably the biggest storyline coming into this fight, was Ian Machado Gary versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. Rakhmonov is kind of the boogeyman of the division. He was supposed to be in line for a title shot, and then Bilal Muhammad, who's the champ, got that bone infection. So they ended up putting together this fight as a kind of a last-minute replacement as a number one contenders fight, essentially. And I thought it was a pretty entertaining fight. It was definitely a high-level defensive battle, which isn't always the most fun to watch, especially for the casuals. But I actually could have seen an argument where Ian Gary would have won this fight. I thought his biggest issue in the fight is he was just playing defense a lot, and then obviously Shavkat basically held him on the fence for a solid amount of time. I mean, he freaking ripped his shorts. Like, it was the first time I'd ever seen that. That his shorts got caught in the fence, and they actually made him change shorts in between rounds. So I guess he actually said it after the fight. Like, thank God he was wearing underwear. Otherwise, we would have been seeing them cheeks from in high definition. But Shavkat ended up getting it done. I personally would have given it to Gary, but it was such a close fight that neither of those guys can really be upset if they lose, because neither of them really went out and tried to take it. I mean, Ian Gary almost submitted him in that fifth round, kind of burned his arms out at the end, trying to get that rear naked. Outside of that, there wasn't really a moment in this fight where I thought either guy was going to finish it. But I actually enjoyed the fight. I thought it was pretty entertaining, and congrats to Shavkat. He's definitely going to get the nod against Bilal, who is, I mean, you can tell he's just not a star in the UFC, because I mean he can't even get into the ring. The UFC security couldn't even get him in there. They just thought some random dude was trying to get into the ring right after he got called out, which I think kind of shows where the fan base is on with Bilal. It's kind of the same as Marab, where they kind of give grapplers like that style a bad name. You got guys like Charles Oliveira that are actively chasing submissions or ground and pounds like John Jones. And then you got guys like Bilal and Marab, where their whole plan is basically to take you down and just hold you there, which wins them fights. But it's a boring style to watch. Like, Khabib showed that you can make it exciting to be a grappler, and these guys just aren't really doing that. They basically just take you down and wait till the bell sounds for the round. That if I want to watch wrestling, I'd rather watch the D1 wrestling out here in America or freestyle internationally. It's just a better product than what those guys are putting out. But after seeing Shavkat, I kind of feel like Bilal is going to be the favorite in that one, just based off the stylistic matchup. But obviously Bilal's got to get healthy first, and I think Shavkat will have the advantage on the feet. But I think grappling wise, Bilal's gonna he could have his way with Shavkat, other than the fact that he's like 6 inches shorter than him. But and then kind of the big controversy of this fight, or of this card, was the Cyril Gane versus Volkov fight, which is the big heavyweights. I actually was really impressed by Cyril Gane. I mean, the last thing we saw of this guy was John Jones tapping him out within like 2 minutes or something, with basically a bully choke where he basically just grabs his neck and squeezes. That just got ragdolled, and he was actually the better grappler in this fight. He out wrestled Volkov basically the whole time until that last round where he was trying to get that submission, and basically just hung out on his back the rest of the time. But I mean, how good a striker that guy is, and Volkov looked huge. He's not like ripped, but he's just a massive human being. He's got to be close to like 7 foot. His legs literally look like tree trunks that he's throwing at you as hard as he can. So he's definitely a scary dude. But they ended up giving Cyril Gane the controversial decision. I actually saw the argument for Cyril, but again, it's similar to the Ian Gary versus Shavkat. It's such a close fight that you can't be upset when you lose. But going forward, I think the fight to make for Gane once he heals up from his toe injury is the Tom Aspinall fight. If they don't give him to John Jones, I think that's the only fight. They've had some history in the past, so I think that's a great fight. They're easily the two most athletic true heavyweights in that division. That I think it would be a fun strikers match. I would say that Cyril doesn't have the power that Tom does, but I think he does have the better footwork, and obviously both of them now can grapple. I would hope that Cyril keeps up with the grappling training, but I think that's the fight to make. And then for Volkov, I'm not really sure where you go with him. I mean, Dana said he thought he won, but the judges didn't think so. So it is a loss. So you can't really put him in that title picture, really. That my only idea with him would maybe be Curtis Blades after the Tom Aspinall loss. They both are losing. The UFC likes to get one winner, and then the other guy will keep on his losing streak. But those guys have fought too, so I'm not really sure where Volkov goes from here. It sucks for him, but he's kind of gonna be in that no man's land. He was right on that cusp of being that next title contender, and now it just kind of puts him back to square one, which sucks for him to have to figure out. But this big boy, he'll have to figure it out and go from there, get some wins to get back in that picture. And then it wasn't a great fight. Bryce Mitchell versus Crone Gracie. It was basically Crone just pulling guard for the whole fight, and then Bryce basically he KO'd him in the I think second or third period. After Crone tried to pull guard, and Bryce caught him and then basically dropped an elbow on his head from standing, and then one more to follow up to get him out. But before that, was a pretty boring fight. Crone got close to a armbar victory at one point. That was really the only way he was going to win this fight, was with some crazy, mistake by Bryce or maybe a transition. But I think we've seen the last of Crone in the UFC. I mean, he was butt scooting in his last fight and then pulling guard anytime he got close to him. The UFC doesn't like that. They want to put on exciting fights, even though he's got that Gracie name to him. I think he's going to be out of the UFC personally. Maybe go do some of the Mikey Musumeci grappling matches or something like that. Put that Gracie name in jiu-jitsu to work. But I think it also showed you that just at this point in the UFC, all these guys are so good. Even though Crone is on another level in terms of pure jiu-jitsu, with the ability to hit somebody in the face, it just kind of neutralizes that jiu-jitsu for a lot of these guys. Outside of that one arm bar, which Bryce defended, he never really had anything close. That overall wasn't a great fight. The finish kind of saved it a little bit, but wasn't great. Bryce Mitchell's obviously one of the most entertaining guys in the sport that doesn't actively talk a ton of shit, and that's just because he's got some wild conspiracy theories. Like, you heard Dana's talking about seatbelts, which was something that Bryce was talking about this week. How government shouldn't be allowed to mandate, seatbelts for its citizens. He's a notorious flat earther. That he's got some wild comments that you can't help but love the guy just because he's just a crazy little farm boy from the South that is a badass at grappling and fighting. That props to him, and I think he's definitely a star in the UFC. So if he rattles off a win or two, then you could maybe start thinking about that Ilia Topuria rematch. Yeah, excited to see what Bryce does going forward. And then just kind of a depressing one to watch was Dominic Reyes versus Anthony Smith. It was on the prelims, but unfortunately Anthony Smith had one of his friends pass away before this fight, and he basically came in and he was crying. That he just really, it was tough to watch a guy that really just shouldn't have been in there, just mentally wasn't prepared. According to Dominic Reyes in his post fight, Anthony basically just put his hands down and said, "Hit me in the face, I want to feel something," which just it was sad to hear. Like, Anthony's obviously a legend in the UFC. Fought John Jones for the title, almost won it, arguably. That it was sad to see. I kind of think it's time for him to start thinking about, retiring. I could see him doing one more where he puts maybe a better showing of himself and is there a little bit better mentally, but it wouldn't shock me if that was the last time we saw him. And then for Dominic, it's 2 in a row, which after his long skid, like, happy to see him succeeding. I actually wouldn't mind seeing him versus Yuri again, which was that big spinning elbow that kind of launched Yuri into that title picture. I think that'd be another fun fight if he maybe doesn't get the win against Jamal Hill coming up. But that's kind of where I'd want to see it. But yeah, it was just a tough fight to watch, man. You see that these guys are just cut from a different cloth. Like, that's a wild move just to say I want to get hit by a 205-pound guy, or however. I think that's correct. Maybe 185 for these guys, but yeah, it was tough to watch. But all in all, it was a solid card from top to bottom. It wasn't one of those where you got that big marquee matchup, so they kind of fill it in at the end of the year with all those kind of B to B plus names that turns into a big card. So thoroughly enjoyed that card. And yeah, we'll move into the NFL. So another big week of NFL. So first we'll start with the Lions and the Packers. The Lions got the 34-31 win. I actually liked the Packers coming into this game. I thought the Lions were going to be a little beat up, and the Packers are overall pretty healthy, and they're a team that can go out and beat anybody. I think Jordan Love is a little bit like a better Jameis Winston in terms of, he can sling it all over the yard. every now and then he'll have that huge 5 touchdown game, but then he can also have those big pick days where he's just throwing a lot of turnovers. Packers started off super slow, got behind big in the first, and then had to kind of claw their way back in the second. I wasn't really impressed by the Packers defense. They could not get off the field versus this Lions team, which is obviously easier said than done because the Lions have been beating everybody and it has been close this year. But I thought coming in the injuries on the 49 or not the 49ers, the Lions was going to kind of play a bigger role than they actually did. Like the Lions just elevated their whole roster, and yeah, I got that big time win. That you know, I feel like Jared Goff's a borderline like fringe MVP candidate, even though he hasn't had like those huge numbers because they've just been tearing everybody up. They got that two-headed monster in the running back room with Montgomery and Gibbs, and obviously Amon-Ra after the whole receiver show is definitely a superstar in terms of receiver. Then Jameson Williams has just been balling out this year. He's so fast that he's that matchup nightmare when you got to worry about all these other guys, including Laporta, who's one of the top tight ends. So, um, yeah, it was a good win by them. I thought the Packers had an opportunity and just couldn't quite get it done. And then arguably one of the worst games of the week was the Jaguars versus the Titans. They're just two really bad teams. Like Jags are on their backup quarterback, which is Mac Jones, and uh, yeah, Titans are still balling with I believe it was Will Levis this game, and they lose 10-6. It was not a great game. Wasn't a super fun watch. The Jags kind of edged it out, which long term might hurt them, just because it's going to lower that draft pick. But I think Titans are pretty much locked into that number one draft pick coming up, and they gotta probably look at least thinking about taking a quarterback if they don't love one of these guys, trying to trade and get a bunch of picks because they've got a ton of holes in their roster. Coach probably needs to be readdressed at the end of the season as well. That that this two teams, there are probably going to be a lot of changes made at the end of this season. Jags, I mean, the only player they're really locked into long term is going to be Trevor Lawrence, unless you can find a trade partner with him. But with his contract, it's going to be tough. He hasn't played particularly well the last 2 years. Last year he was obviously hurt a lot, but yeah, it's going to be a tough spot for them going forward. I don't know what. I mean, you could argue maybe the Belichick fits there, but Titans, it's going to be a tough job after Vrabel left. I just don't know where they're going to go as a team and a culture. So I think Titans fans are going to have to strap up for a couple of rough years because I mean you're just not seeing much out of this team. Not a ton of talent. It's not even like a Dan Campbell and the Lions thing where they're playing super super gritty and hard. That both these teams are going to have a bunch of changes going forward, and yeah, if you're one of those teams fans, like strap in 'cause it's going to be a little bit before you guys are relevant again, most likely. So, and then Dolphins at Jets. Jets lose in overtime, 32-26. I thought this was Aaron Rodgers' best game as a Jet. I've honestly been watching a lot more Jets football these last couple weeks just because I kind of am feeling that Aaron Rodgers is going to retire at the end of this year. Which is depressing because I've been a big Aaron Rodgers fan for a long time. I'm a Broncos fan, so he was always in the NFC. So only way I would see him was in the Super Bowl. So I never had any ill will against the guy, and he's one of the most fun quarterbacks in his prime to watch that I've ever seen personally. So I've been just trying to soak it in, watch him while I still can, because I think this will be his last year if I had to guess. And it was a really good game. I mean the Jets were in pretty firm control, and the Dolphins had to come back. Obviously, they've got a lot of speed on their roster with Tyreek and Waddle, and then I think it's Etienne is, I believe, how you say the running back. That they can come back in and anybody just because they're so fast and they can do it really quick. And then first possession in overtime, they go down and score. So, yeah, I thought the Jets were looking good. I mean, their receiving core is obviously really good when you got Garrett Wilson and Devontae, which I think Devontae coming has been a big help for Garrett. He's not getting those double teams, so he's got a lot of those single man-to-man matchups that he's just been eating up this year. And then if he gets hot, then that helps Devontae. So I have enjoyed watching that receiving duo. the running game is just abysmal. Brees Hall is not as good as everybody thought coming into this year. In my opinion, that I think they're going to have to address that running back. The line needs some work because Aaron's been getting hit a lot, and then their defense just hasn't been great. I mean, Sauce Gardner was hurt for this one, which definitely didn't help when you're facing those big 2-time receivers. So it was a fun game to watch, but I did think the Jets did enough to win, but they choked it away at the end. So long term probably helps them just because now we're starting to think about draft stock and positions in this upcoming draft. But congrats to the Dolphins, and then I think there's going to be some changes that come out of the Vikings versus the Falcons game. The Falcons lost 42-21 to the Vikings. Jordan Addison had 3 or 4 touchdowns, I believe. So they're also up there for the best receiving core in the league, just with Justin Jefferson and then Addison. All right. I believe the Kirk had 4 interceptions, I believe 3 or 4 interceptions, which is he's thrown like 18, or I saw some stat he's thrown like 12 to 18 picks or something like that and 0 touchdowns the last couple of weeks, which might be a little off, but either way, even if it's close to that, it's crazy that I think if he has one more showing like that it might be time to sub in Michael Penix and see what you got in the rookie. And Kirk can't even complain 'cause, when you turn the ball over that much and you're not scoring at all, like that, you're just asking to get benched no matter how much money you're making. The Falcons, yeah, they're not a great team. You got a lot of talent on that roster, but I don't know if it's coaching. I don't know if it's culture, whatever it is. Because, I mean, you've seen from like Kyle Pitts, who's supposed to be this all-time tight end receiving talent, just not show up. And Brian Robinson hasn't really been a thing. That Drake London's probably been the most reliable weapon they've had this year. And, it's just not turning into wins or scoring. That they thoroughly got their butt kicked by the Vikings, who clearly are a very good team. And I think they can beat anybody on any given weekend just because of how good that offense is, and then their defense is above average defense as well. So they're going to be a tough out if they are in the playoffs against whoever they're playing. They're still, I guess, in contention for the number 1 spot with the Lions, who I believe they come and play in the next couple weeks. So that could be for the number 1 seed in that bye. That if it's going through the Vikings, that's a tough place to play with the skull and all that stuff. That Vikings are a great team, and I believe their head coach should be in the running for coach of the year because he's done a great job, especially with Sam Darnold. And then Saints and Giants. I mean, Giants cannot catch a break. They had a tying field goal they missed. They lost 11-14 to the Giants. No, the Saints lost that. That you can't really defend the Giants going forward. It's just not a lot of good players out there. They're not playing well. Obviously, they don't have a quarterback that they're going to have to address in the draft after releasing Daniel Jones. Saints are a weird team, too. They're super hurt all year, like a lot of their star players. But, I mean, you still got Alvin Kamara, who's been just a monster for the last, 8 years or however long he's been. Basically, since a rookie, he's been one of the top 5 running backs and receiver threats out of the backfield I've ever personally seen. That he's definitely cost me in fantasy playoffs in the last couple of years. It's always the guy that beats me at the end of the year has Kamara, and he'll drop 50 or 60 points out of nowhere. We're not bitter, but the Saints are just a weird team. They're going to have to hire a new coach. I think Kubiak, which is the offensive coordinator, could get considered from it, but you might have to look outside. I think he'd be a hot commodity just after their hot start, and offensive coaches obviously are big time, and he comes from a football pedigree with Gary. It wasn't a super entertaining game. Derek Carr got hurt in it. I believe he broke his hand, his left hand, if I saw that right. So it gives you more chance to see what you got in Spencer Rattler, or maybe one of their other practice squad guys they put up. But they're probably gonna have to revamp this roster pretty heavily as well. So I don't think either of those teams are gonna be big spenders in the offseason or anything like that. I think they're gonna have to do it through the draft. And then a surprisingly good game was the Panthers versus the Eagles. Eagles get the win 22-16. Panthers had the shot to win it. Like Bryce threw a pretty solid ball. It could have been a little better, but it was definitely catchable. And receiver dropped it on basically the one. It went hit his hands and just dropped it. That Panthers have turned into a sneaky good team. They've got a lot of momentum. Bryce has definitely saved his NFL career, at least as a starter, in the last couple of weeks since getting benched. And Andy Dalton got in that car accident, unfortunately, and then Bryce came in and has played very well since then. That I think you're seeing that is if you surround Bryce with enough talent and the line does a good job protecting him, uh, he can be a starter. I don't think he'll ever be in that top, probably top 8, but I think you could be anywhere from 10 to 15. I think that's within reason if you put enough good players around him. I think he could be very similar to like a Brock Purdy out in the San Fran. That I think that's easily within his capabilities. But they're a tough out at this point of the season. I believe they're already eliminated from the playoffs. I could be wrong on that, but and then the Eagles have been riding pretty high this whole season, especially with Saquon being a MVP candidate. Jalen Hurts has been playing pretty well, and then obviously they've got the great receivers. Last week the story was Cooper DeJean tackling Derrick Henry in the open field. So Eagles are a great team. I mean, they can lose to anybody, but when they got that offense humming, that run game going, they're a tough out that you can't load the box because AJ Brown and Devontae Smith are so good, but you can't play coverage because then Saquon will just run all over you. So they're a tough team to play. That yeah, wouldn't shock me if they went to the Super Bowl this year. And then Steelers Browns. Steelers get the 27-14 win. Oh, this season has just made me dislike Russell Wilson even more. Like, if he could have done this in Denver the last 2 years, he'd still be here. Instead, he's screwing my cap and balling out in Pittsburgh. Yeah, super frustrating. Browns got eliminated from the playoffs at this point. Jameis Winston turned the ball over again, which is on brand for this guy. This is a guy that needed LASIK because he couldn't see the players he was throwing the ball to. He's like, I can see the colors. That's it. So, wild dude, wildly entertaining as well. But yeah, big time rivalry, and Browns have historically not gotten a lot of wins in that rivalry, and today was no exception. The Steelers are going to be primed to make a playoff run. That if they can get some home games, it's a tough play to play. It's cold. That they're a threat to make a run in the AFC this year. And then Raiders at Bucks. Raiders have got to be one of the worst run organizations in the NFL. And it's kind of like a sneaky one because everybody loves the Raiders for some reason because back in the day they were good. But they've not even attempted to address the quarterback position in the last couple of years. The only move they tried to make really was bringing in Jimmy Garoppolo when Josh McDaniels was there, which worked out terribly. I believe he's on the Rams now, so they're rolling out Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew and trying to tell their fans that they're a good team, and they just really aren't. They've got a couple of really good top end players like Max Crosby, and Brock Bowers has obviously been a slam dunk for them for this year. But outside of that, they're just a terribly run organization that, yeah, they've got to address that quarterback position, whether that's trading for somebody, maybe a Trevor Lawrence type, or rolling the dice on Shador or one of those other rookie quarterbacks that are coming out. Because outside of that, if I'm a Raiders fan, I have no hope for the future. Because you can only put makeup on the pigs so much and tell them that's a pretty late. Like, it doesn't work. I think they're definitely not a great run organization. Whereas the Bucks, ever since Brady's been there, they've been a solid organization. I mean, Baker's been playing pretty well. He didn't play great this game, but they did enough to win. Mike Evans is still balling out, still first ballot Hall of Famer at receiver. But yeah, they got the job done and fairly convincingly. So, and then Seahawks versus Cardinals. I actually watched this game at the bar, surrounded by Seahawks fans, and those fans are a lot. All they were doing was just chanting Seahawks. And they're just a lot. But their team looked really good against the Cardinals after basically driving the field and throwing that first touchdown. Kyler Murray was frankly awful. Threw a couple really bad interceptions. Uh, yeah, I mean him and Marvin Harrison Jr. just are not connecting. That James Conner has been balling out again, like he has quietly for the last couple of years. But outside of that, like they just haven't played very well. Uh, Especially after the bye week. The Seahawks, I'm not really a Geno believer. He's not going to lose you a ton of games, but he won't really win them. But I mean, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, their running back had a ridiculous game, which is basically what won them single-handedly the game this week. Which I've never even heard of the guy. I believe Kenneth Walker, their normal starter, was hurt, so he got the call up and definitely paid off. I think he had 2 or 3 touchdown runs or catches that just played really well and kept them and basically willed them single-handedly to that win. So, yeah, good for them. Cardinals are. I think they're gonna have to start winning out to be considered for the playoffs because they've choked a couple of these games away and basically are rolling the dice now whether they get to make the playoffs. So, and then kind of game of the week was the Rams versus the Bills. I really liked the Rams coming into this. I thought this was going to be one of those games that the Bills kind of look past. And they basically did. They got their ass whipped in that first half. And then it took basically Josh Allen being superhuman to come back into the game in the second half, where he had like 3 touchdowns through the air on the ground or something crazy like that, where we haven't seen it in a long, long time. But I didn't think the Bills looked very good. I think the Rams can beat anybody on any given weekend. They don't really have a running game, but as long as they're protecting Stafford fairly well, that guy's good enough to pick any defense in the league apart. And I thought they were going to run away with this game. That I did think this game basically solidified Josh Allen as the MVP, at least favorite for now, coming in, especially with Lamar not playing very well and then Saquon being a running back. This is typically a quarterback position battle for MVP. That I do think that game basically solidified Josh Allen for the MVP unless he gets hurt or, as a Kirk Cousins 4-game 0 touchdown kind of thing that they lose to a bad team or anything like that. Outside of that, I don't see him not winning MVP this year. Whether they make a big run in the playoffs, we'll see. They're a solid team, but they tend to lose to the Chiefs, which apparently everybody does in the playoffs. So, but really fun game. I mean, not unless you're a fan of defense, it was a great game to watch just because basically every drive they were scoring in some facet. And then 49ers Bears, the 49ers waxed the Bears, kicked the living crap out of them. It was like 300 yards of total offense to 2 at some point. That I think Caleb Williams is kind of still getting protected by the media a little bit. Like, he has no business being in offensive rookie of the year conversations. They keep saying that this job is super desirable just because of Caleb Williams, which I have not seen. Like, you see Drake May working with a lot less, looking a lot better. That I think that Caleb Williams has definitely gotten hyped up by the media for no reason other than a couple of garbage time touchdowns. Like, they typically get their butts handed to them in the first half, and then they get some garbage points once they're down big in the second. And they tried to do that, but 49ers definitely needed this win. They've been kind of reeling for the last couple of weeks, especially with injuries, that this gets them back on track again. They're one of these teams that if they don't basically win out, they're going to play a risk of missing the playoffs. Thankfully for them, the AFC has a lot of kind of middle record teams. They're still in the hunt for the wild card spots, so they're not out of it yet. But if you win or lose 1 or 2 more, I think you can kind of call it a wrap for the 49ers for this year, which would obviously be a big time letdown for them and probably a reason to start tearing that thing apart, trading Debo, maybe Kittle, somebody like that, or maybe even Brock Purdy, or I've heard rumblings about Kyle Shanahan getting traded if stuff goes bad for some draft picks just to start to rebuild this roster a little bit. But as long as they keep winning, they're avoiding that. They're an older team, but they gotta stay healthy is their only chance they have. And then Kind of the bullshit game of the week was the Chiefs and the Chargers, which is nothing new for the Chiefs. The Chiefs win on a doinked field goal to win 19-17 at the end of the game. Like, I still don't think this is a very good team. This offense is not great. The defense is very good. I'll give them that. I would be surprised if their DC doesn't get looked at for potential head coaching positions at the end of the year, or at least they should. But yeah, the Chiefs are just winning these lucky games. Like, you really almost can't write it. Like, they've won on blocked field goals. This one was a doink field goal that bounced in. Like, I'm not a believer in this fan or this team. And then the Chargers just don't have enough talent to overcome a lot of these big time scoring, games. Like, they're relying on a third round receiver to be their number one right now. So they're still kind of a borderline rebuild, even though they're in playoff contention right now. But yeah, heartbreaking one if you're Chargers fans. But if you put your tin cap on, maybe the Chiefs are getting some calls, and the NFL or maybe putting like a magnetic ball or something on there. You never know. But yeah, I'm not a Chiefs fan or believer for this season. I think if they win the Super Bowl, it will be the luckiest season we've ever seen, and it won't even be close. That Yeah, I'm personally I'm not a Chiefs fan. I will own that. I know a lot of people are Chiefs fans, especially the new Taylor Swift era, but I'm personally not. They're my rival. So on principle I can't be a Chiefs fan. But I think they're the most overhyped team in the league still. And I personally don't think they're going to go that deep into the playoffs, but that's why you play the game. You never know. So right now, the Bengals and the Cowboys are going to be playing on Monday night, and yeah, should be Joe Burrow having a high-powered offense versus the Micah Parsons in the pass rush, and then seeing what Cooper Rush can do. So we'll get back to that after that game. So thank you for joining me. This has been Jack Paisley, the Sports Casual, and thank you for coming on this journey with me.